Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. I want to keep week 32 going with today's Third Age Thursday, our time to revisit those familiar and less than familiar stories from the Third Age. Now, this weekend next, as we wrap up Series 4, we're going to be reading through the story of Cirion and Eorl from Unfinished Tales to learn more about the origins of the people and nation of Rohan. I want to pick up where we left off last week as we join Cirion and Eorl atop the Halifirien, though I'll back up to the start of the paragraph that I ended with last time. Then Cirion went up the stair with Eorl, and the others followed. And when they came to the summit, they saw there a wide oval place of level turf, unfenced. But at its eastern end there stood a low mound, on which grew the white flowers of Halifirien, and the westering sun touched them with gold. And now, moving on. Then the Lord of Dol Amroth, chief of those in the company of Cirion, went towards the mound and saw, lying on the grass before it, and yet unmarred by weed or weather, a black stone, and on the stone 3 letters were engraved. Then he said to Cirion, "Is this then a tomb? But what great man of old lies here?" "Have you not read the letters?" said Cirion. "I have," said the prince, "and therefore I wonder, for the letters are Lambe Ando Lambe. But there is no tomb for Elendil, nor has any man since his day dared to use that name." "Nonetheless, this is his tomb," said Cirion, "and from it comes the awe that dwells on this hill and in the woods below. From Isildur who raised it to Meneldil who succeeded him, and so down all the line of the kings and down the line of the stewards, even to myself, this tomb has been kept a secret by Isildur's command. For he said, 'Here is the midpoint of the kingdom of the south, and here shall the memorial of Elendil the faithful abide in the keeping of the Valar, while the kingdom endures. This hill shall be a hallow, and let no man disturb its peace and silence, unless he be an heir of Elendil. I have brought you here, so that the oaths here taken may seem of deepest solemnity to ourselves and to our heirs upon either side.'" Then all those present stood a while in silence with bowed heads, until Cirion said to Eorl, "If you are ready, take now your oath in such manner as seems to you fitting, according to the customs of your people." Eorl then stood forth, and taking his spear from his esquire, he set it upright in the ground. Then he drew his sword and cast it up, shining in the sun. And catching it again, he stepped forward and laid the blade upon the mound, but with his hand still about the hilts. He spoke then in a great voice the oath of Eorl. This he said in the tongue of the Eotheod, which in the common speech is interpreted, "Hear now, all peoples who bow not to the shadow in the east. By the gift of the Lord of the Mundburg we will come to dwell in the land that he names Calenarthon. And therefore I vow in my own name, and on behalf of the Eotheod of the north, that between us and the great people of the west there shall be friendship forever. Their enemies shall be our enemies. Their need shall be our need. And whatsoever evil or threat or assault may come upon them, we will aid them to the utmost end of our strength. This vow shall descend to my heirs, all such as may come after me in our new land, and let them keep it in faith unbroken, lest the shadow fall upon them, and they become accursed." Then Eorl sheathed his sword and bowed, and went back to his captains. Cirion then made answer. Standing to his full height, he laid his hand upon the tomb, and in his right hand held up the white wand of the stewards, and spoke words that filled those who heard them with awe. For as he stood up, the sun went down in flame in the west, and his white robes seemed to be on fire. And after he had vowed that Gondor should be bound by a like bond of friendship and aid in all need, he lifted up his voice and said in Quenya, "Vanda sina termaruva elena norio alcar Enyaliën aralendil vorando voranwe. Nai tiruvantes I harar mahalmassen minumen ari erui or ilye mahalmar ea tenoio." And again he said in the common speech, "This oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and of the faith of Elendil the faithful, in the keeping of those who sit upon the thrones of the west, and of the one who is above all thrones forever." Such an oath had not been heard in Middle-earth since Elendil himself had sworn alliance with Gil-galad, king of the Eldar. When all was done and the shadows of evening were falling, Cirion and Eorl with their company went down again in silence through the darkling wood, and came back to the camp by the Merring stream, where tents had been prepared for them. After they had eaten, Cirion and Eorl, with the prince of Dol Amroth and Eamund, the chief captain of the host of the Eotheod, sat together and defined the boundaries of the authority of the king of the Eotheod and the steward of Gondor. And then we get a couple of paragraphs defining those territories, along with a couple of exceptions, like Orthanc, which was in the middle of Rohan, but the keys to which would remain in the keeping of the steward of Gondor. And finally, the Great Road was required to remain open, and the Eotheod would be responsible for maintaining it within their new country. Let's get back to the text. By this pact, only a small part of the Wood of Anwar, west of the Merring stream, was included in the realm of Eorl. But Cirion declared that the Hill of Anwar was now a hallowed place of both peoples, and the Eorlings and the stewards should henceforward share its guard and maintenance. In later days, however, as the Rohirrim grew in power and numbers, while Gondor declined and was ever threatened from the east and by sea, the wardens of Anwar were provided entirely by the people of Eastfold, and the wood became, by custom, part of the royal domain of the kings of the Mark. The hill they named the Halifirien, and the wood the Firienholt. In later times, the day of the oath-taking was reckoned as the first day of the new kingdom, when Eorl took the title of King of the Mark of the Riders. But in the event, it was some while before the Rohirrim took possession of the land, and during his life, Eorl was known as Lord of the Eotheod and King of Calenardhon. The term Mark signified a borderland, especially one serving as a defense of the inner lands of a realm. The Sindarin names Rohan for the Mark and Rohirrim for the people were devised first by Hallas, son and successor of Cirion, but were often used not only in Gondor, but by the Eotheod themselves. It's another long reading, folks, but we'll take a look at some of the highlights before we wrap up. This is, I think, the first time we see the Lord of Dol Amroth referred to as the Prince. And there's a lot behind the story of Dol Amroth and its ruling line that might actually become its own Third Age Thursday sometime. We also get the mention of the letters on the black stone atop the mound. Lambe, Ando, Lambe. That's an L followed by the ND sound and then another L. It's Elendil's name minus the vowels, and the footnote tells us that he used that as a badge and on his seals. So this must be his tomb. But the Prince of Dol Amroth is confused because he'd been told there was never a tomb for Elendil. But it is, Cirion explains. It is a secret and sacred place, forbidden to all but Elendil's heirs and the stewards because of their authority in the king's name. I want so badly to see the Oath of Eorl in Old English. The footnote says the translation into the common speech was not perfect. It says the original was in ancient terms and made in the forms of verse and high speech that were used by the Rohirrim, in which Eorl had great skill. Unfortunately, no such text exists, Christopher tells us in the same footnote. But you know that's got to be the most incredible alliterative verse ever, and I would have loved to have heard it. Now, using Eru's name in the oath was virtually unheard of. It's also, one might say, dangerous. No oath would be sworn in Eru's name again until Aragorn took the throne as a Lesar, renewing the bond with the Rohirrim under Eomer's kingship. According to the footnote, it had been held lawful only for the king of Numenor to call Eru to witness, and then only on the most grave and solemn occasions. The line of the kings had come to an end in Ar-Pharazôn, who perished in the downfall, but Elendil Voranda was descended from Tar Elendil, the fourth king, and was held to be the rightful lord of the faithful, who had taken no part in the rebellion of the kings and had been preserved from destruction. Cirion was the steward of the kings descended from Elendil, and so far as Gondor was concerned, had as regent all their powers until the king should come again. Nonetheless, his oath astounded those who heard it and filled them with awe, and was alone, over and above the venerable tomb, sufficient to hallow the place where it was spoken. Then there's a very lengthy footnote on the names of Rohan and the Rohirrim, but we'll save that for a Word Nerd Wednesday sometime. Until then, Folks, thank you for joining me for this week's Third Age Thursday. Come back next week as we wrap up the story of Cirion and Eorl. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times. You can support the show, get an ad-free feed, and a bonus episode every week. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as I welcome a very special guest for Fandom Friday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow at Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.